Welcome to our annual meeting. Today you will be hearing from our legal and policy staff regarding the presidential transition. I know we are all processing complex emotions regarding Trump's re-election, but what we know is this. Through our 105-year history, we've learned that our commitment to justice is stronger than any one administration. With measures like the New Mexico Civil Rights Act and protections in place for those who need gender-affirming care and reproductive health care, New Mexico is a beacon for civil rights, and we plan to keep it that way. This past year, we fought dangerous conditions in immigrant detention facilities, ended life sentences without parole for juveniles, ensured access to addiction treatment for those in prison, protected Indigenous students from discrimination in schools, and made New Mexico a reproductive sanctuary state. These victories remind us that change is possible when we stand together. Please join us to stand up for the principles of justice, equality, and inclusion. Now I'd like to pass it to our Legal Director, Maria Martinez Sanchez, for an update on our legal work over the past year.
Hello, my name is Maria Martinez Sanchez. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Legal Director of the ACLU of New Mexico. What guides me in this work, honestly, are my colleagues. The people that work at this organization are some of the kindest, most compassionate, passionate people that you will find. They do this work because they believe in it. It is not just a job for them. And it helps me get out of bed every single day to come do this difficult work, knowing that there are people here that see the humanity in everyone, regardless of who you are, where you come from, the color of your skin, who you love, or even things you might have done in your past. And they're doing this work. I'm doing it alongside them. And I couldn't be prouder of them and of this organization. To sum up, the legal department's work quickly is a difficult task. So I'm just going to give some highlights. In the reproductive rights space, our attorneys have fought back aggressively against local ordinances that are attempting to ban abortion in certain corners of the state. And we submitted an amicus brief in the Supreme Court supporting the Attorney General's efforts to deem those laws improper. In our prisoners' rights work, we are pushing back forcefully against inhumane treatment of people who are incarcerated in our state. We successfully settled a case that is bringing life-saving opioid medications to people in prisons earlier than the law mandates it. We are pushing back against solitary confinement, and we are ensuring that people who are in prisons in New Mexico have access to books, which is such a basic, fundamental thing, but something that is not happening at the level it should be right now. In the immigrant rights context, we represented two families that were the victims of Trump's family separation policy. Believe it or not, those cases are still ongoing around the country. We continue to aggressively push back against the expansion of ICE detention in New Mexico, and we're representing the family of a young Brazilian man who took his life at the Torrance County Detention Facility after living in those horrific conditions and being treated horrifically by the staff there. As always, we're continuing to represent people who are victims of police violence in New Mexico, and we are pushing back aggressively against the criminalization of our unhoused communities, especially here in Albuquerque, where we're litigating a case against the city for pushing unhoused individuals off of public property, even though they have nowhere else to go. In San Juan County, we also represented the family of a man who went in for health care to the local hospital and who ultimately died because of a lack of Navajo interpretation. In the free speech context, we provided a lot of support over the summer to individuals who were participating in protests over Gaza. We're also representing two members of the press and one individual, all of whom were arrested for engaging in First Amendment protected activities. We know people are scared right now. We know there's a lot of anxiety after the last election, but we want people to know that we will be here at the ACLU continuing to fight to protect people's freedoms.
Thank you so much, Maria. Now we're going to shift it over to our Director of Public Policy, Lena Weber-Salazar, for an update on our policy work over the past year.
Hi, my name is Lena Weber. I'm the Interim Director of Public Policy with the ACLU of New Mexico. I am so proud to be part of this work and motivated every single day by being part of a long history in New Mexico, working hand in hand with partners, community advocates, to continue to fight every day for more freedom, more justice, more equity in our state. This year, we also had some big policy wins. In the 2024 legislative session, we successfully stopped multiple harmful and unconstitutional bills that would have contributed to mass incarceration and the criminalization, particularly of unhoused communities. We also championed some really big budget wins that focused on increasing access to housing across the state, increasing access to behavioral health care, education, jobs. We secured funding and made some further progress in increasing access to menstrual products for those incarcerated, which is an issue of basic dignity and hygiene. And we also made progress in issues ranging from limiting mass surveillance to continuing the fight to work to end the ICE detention of asylum seekers in New Mexico, and further increasing access to health care across the state. Then, despite widespread opposition, our governor called a special session in July. We coordinated alongside many partners, mental health advocates, and advocates like you to call attention to how harmful the governor's agenda was, which would have further fueled mass incarceration and the criminalization of homelessness. We are so thankful to be part of such a strong coalition of community advocates and partners, and for our legislature for standing strong in the New Mexican values of centering the inherent dignity of all and rejecting fear-mongering. And we're calling on you to join us in this fight. There's going to be many ways to be involved, from volunteering, community engagement opportunities, ways to get involved in the upcoming legislative session and pushing for policies that will help make us safer. So stay tuned for more updates. We're going to have a lot of opportunities coming up.
Welcome to our live panel. I'm excited about the staff we have here today to join us in this discussion. Today, we're looking at the work ahead, and I will start with some introductions. On my right, we have Becca Sheff, Senior Staff Attorney, who focuses on our immigrant rights work. And to my left in order, we have Daniel Williams, Policy Advocate, who focuses on criminal legal system work. To his left, Jasmine Taiting Fong. She is a staff attorney who focuses on gender equity and reproductive rights. And last but not least, Preston Sanchez, who's a senior staff attorney who focuses on Indigenous justice. We'll jump right in with some questions. We intend for this to be a conversation between our panelists. And the first question, I'll start with Preston, is with the election results, how has the landscape of civil rights and liberties changed in New Mexico?
Well, it's a good question, and I'll speak to what I understand to be the threats and the issues pertaining to Indigenous communities in New Mexico. I think what we can expect are two, if not many more, immediate threats on day one. And it starts with, the new Trump administration replacing Department of Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, who's the first Native American woman to ever serve in that role. And she did a great job of really understanding what's at stake when it comes to the protection of cultural heritage sites like Chaco Canyon and natural resources all throughout the United States. And she values what Indigenous people value about that land and that space and how sacred it is. And so she worked to ensure that those were protected. For example, she expanded the buffer zones around Chaco Canyon by an additional 10 miles. And so with her replacement by Trump, we can't expect that those protections will last much longer. But we can also expect that we're going to see greater threats by the fracking and oil and gas industries, pillaging those lands and those resources and depleting, what's most sacred to Indigenous people. So that's going to be one of the first immediate threats. Secondly, I think it's going to be a revisit of 2016 to 2020, where blatant racism and discrimination occurs at all different levels of both state and federal governments, but also within private entities like hospitals, but also like in public schools, and pretty much by the hands of law enforcement at times as well. So, but that being said, we stand ready with our first effort would be to coordinate with tribal leaders and tribal communities to determine what's the best course of action to protect, environmental protections and sacred sites. And then also we stand ready to litigate and advocate against racism and discrimination.
Yeah, thank you, Preston. I know here in New Mexico, we're all proud of Deb Haaland, and I haven't even thought about that as an angle of losing her with the Trump administration coming up. Daniel, I'm going to kick the same question to you.
Well, I think for my whole lifetime and longer, we've seen politicians really from both sides of the aisle take this tough on crime approach that has fueled mass incarceration and harmed our communities. And unfortunately, I think Donald Trump really represents sort of the pinnacle of that approach, from the rhetoric he's used on the campaign, from the way he behaved in his first term in office. I think we can really expect to see a doubling down on these policies that don't keep us safe and in fact harm our people, like using law enforcement as the sort of first and best response to everything that comes up in our community, incarcerating huge numbers of people, treating substance abuse and homelessness as things to be solved with criminalization as opposed to public health crises. And I think as we see him moving in that direction at the federal level, certainly I think we can anticipate that he will use federal resources to incentivize states to take that same approach. I think he'll also will embolden and sort of fuel the fires of that kind of rhetoric here in New Mexico. I think another really big concern for me about the potential of a Trump administration, or not the potential now, the reality of a Trump administration for the criminal legal system is that one of the bulwarks of protections of our rights, both at the federal level and at the state and local level, in terms of the criminal legal system, has been the Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights. And that's who has been pursuing the consent decree here in Albuquerque. That's who engages a lot of work in both federal and local prisons. And I think that when we look at someone like Matt Gaetz becoming Attorney General, I don't think we can hope for the Department of Justice to be that sort of firewall for civil rights protections that they've been under other administrations. And so I think we're going to really have to step up our game here in New Mexico to make sure that we're putting as many protections in the state law, that our leaders have as rigorous of an understanding of what really keeps us safe, which is not cops, it's not prisons, it's investments in our community, because the federal government's going to be taking a very different approach.
Becca, I'm going to ask you the same question. How do you think the landscape of civil rights changes, especially in your focus with immigrant community and immigrant rights?
Yeah, quite a bit, right? The incoming Trump administration has not been shy in articulating what its plans are in terms of ramping up immigration enforcement and terrorizing immigrant families. And we are prepared to bring the fight to them. Litigation is going to continue to be a central part of our strategy. We have a team of experienced attorneys and advocates who were in the trenches in the Trump administration, directly on the border the first time around, and we're ready for round two. We're ready for what's coming. They've projected a lot of things, right, in terms of mass deportations, in terms of raids on people's workplaces, in terms of trying to punish communities that are so bold as to, and to provide sanctuary for folks They're projecting stripping citizenship from people and a whole host of other things, right? But there's a lot that can be done in response even before Inauguration Day. So immigrant families certainly can get prepared in terms of doing some safety planning, in the event of being picked up or being detained or deported. There's a lot that New Mexicans can do to, call on our state officials to safeguard our state in the face of what's coming and not to allow our government to be co-opted into cooperating with the federal government to enforce the harmful initiatives that they've projected, which we know will harm our communities. So there's a lot there that folks can do to get ready, and we're certainly going to be ready to go around too.
Thank you, Becca. And Jasmine, we heard Becca shift it like how we're preparing. And so there's kind of a two-part question here for you. How do you think the landscape in your realm of public health, access to reproductive health, gender equity is going to change, and how are we prepared to respond to that?
Absolutely. So I think that we have seen after the fall of Roe very quickly how the landscape has changed from there being criminalization in other states for seeking healthcare or assisting people in getting healthcare, including abortions. So I think that we've already, as a community, seen how the bans in other states have affected us in New Mexico. In New Mexico, we have laws that do make it so abortion is accessible. And we have been a haven in the Southwest for people to come and get the healthcare that they need, unfortunately, when they have had to flee their home states and are being criminalized. So in one way, New Mexico, we are ready and we are prepared because we have been responding to these healthcare needs that people have had since the fall of Roe. Now, obviously, with the Trump administration, that is possible that there could be different federal laws that are passed that would have impacts on the states and the ways that we could have our laws. However, we have laws in New Mexico that protect information privacy, also protecting against discrimination for people who seek healthcare. So we have already started to make sure that we have those protections for people, and that includes not cooperating with other states if they're trying to get private health information regarding reproductive health to criminalize someone somewhere else. So those laws and the privacy protections that we have, we want to make sure that they continue to become stronger so that there is more privacy. And we have always tried to expand access for healthcare in New Mexico, and that includes our rural communities. So expanding telehealth, expanding procedural abortions, and the places that people can go. Because while we are going to be serving people in New Mexico, there are also people that will need to come here to get that care. We have been doing it. We are going to continue to do that, and also be aware of any challenges that may come from the federal government or limitations and be ready to litigate those.
If I could just jump in, Leon, I think one thing that is striking me as I'm hearing my really brilliant colleagues talking is that, the severity of the threats that we face from Trump is unique and unprecedented, but this is not the first time that New Mexicans' rights have been threatened. And this is not the first time we've been up against challenges in New Mexico. And so we know in our community how to fight for our rights. And when I hear Preston and Becca and Jasmine talking about what the landscape is right now, I'm reminded of how much work has been put in over the last several years and how privileged the ACLU has been to be part of that, to really get us to the place where we are, where we're primed to fight for our rights as strong as we're going to need to. And the power that we've built in the legislature, in the courts, in the community with our partners. So we are in a place where we can bring the fight to the Trump administration. As Becca said, we are really well equipped to make these.
Thank you, Daniel, for that. And that leads next in really well into my next question for Becca. When we experienced the first Trump administration, I know you litigated some cases that dealt with the aftermath of family separation on behalf of families who were separated. We worked really hard to prevent ICE from making arrests in and around our courthouses, and in fact made an agreement with the Biden administration that the federal law enforcement would stay out of the courtrooms and courthouses. It's an important place for people who have been victims of crimes, who need legal process, to be able to go into our courts and be safe. And now that I'm thinking about those family separation policies and our courts not even being safe havens from arrest, like, how are you grappling with that when you kind of say that experience makes us ready, but also, you know, our people in mixed status families like need to be prepared? Like, how are you kind of thinking about that?
Yeah, I think it's an important frame to have in mind, right? We know exactly what Trump is capable of, right? We know what family separation looked like, and we've been doing our part to get, you know, the remedies that we can for families that were directly harmed by the so-called zero tolerance policy that resulted in ripping apart thousands of children from their parents. And there's no way the courts can ever repair the trauma that those families endured. We will do everything in our power to prevent those types of cruel and abhorrent policies from reoccurring. We know what that looks and feels like in New Mexico. We saw it in Artesia, folks might remember, about a decade ago, when families were caged there. We saw it at the border under the first Trump administration. And, you know, we will be the ones on the front lines of looking out for and responding directly to policies that may unfold this time around. And, you know, it's our job oftentimes as lawyers to be very watchful, to be thinking about all the possible scenarios and how to get ahead of them. And I say that because, you know, families in our communities, you know, shouldn't be in a place of so much fear right now that they're immobilized. We all need to be able to continue going about our lives, sending our kids to school, taking care of things. But it's our job to be out there on the forefront of protecting and defending the rights of all New Mexicans, no matter where they come from. And to me, the law really is a tool, right? I think we need to be very pragmatic and very realistic about what's possible with the different tools that we have going into this incoming administration. The courts are not going to save us. Lawyers are not going to save us. But we can use the tools that we have available to us to throw sand in the gears, to make their lives harder, to, you know, block everything that we can that's going to cause harm to our communities. So that pragmatism is really important. One thing I was saying under the first Trump administration, when I was practicing direct immigration services, representing people in their asylum cases, representing people as they were trying to get citizenship, is under Trump, it felt like every time you thought there was a wall that you could lean on, it would just turn to mist and you would like fall through it. Mm-hmm. And it's that idea where now, like, if it's not nailed down, it's probably getting swept away, right? If it's just a policy, if it's just an agreement, if it's just a settlement, it's the type of thing that they could back out of. So I don't think we can take any of that for granted. We just have to be really nimble and flexible and strategic and build on our collective experience to do everything that we can to bring the fight to them.
Thank you, Becca. You know, Preston, I've been thinking you've done a lot of work in voting rights in and around our pueblos and the Navajo Nation, and have fought so hard for equity and education for our Native American students here in New Mexico. And like, we've made some progress in those areas, and now it's, you know, not hard to spiral into places where we're thinking we're taking steps back. Like, where are you finding like a source of hope and like to keep, you know, fighting for those rights, where it felt like we're making progress and now we throw our hands up and have to recollect where we're at?
Yeah, I think it's important to lean back on sort of like the indigenous values in the history. You know, there was a very notable person in my life who also served as an expert witness in one of my cases, and his name is Dr. Joseph Swina, and he would, you know, always remind us that as indigenous people, we've survived 3 governments thus far, starting, you know, from a time in which contact happened, first contact with indigenous people, to now the United States imposing some very harsh policies, not just in the Trump administration, but for the last 150 plus years. And so how do we endure all of that history and still manage to find happiness and progress in our communities. So that's initially where I start. But we're not alone in this either. And I think that's most important here is that ACLU doesn't work in a silo. We work in collaboration with other Native-led organizations and organizations that are really working to stand side by side with us, including tribal leaders as well. And we want to make sure that sovereignty rights are respected, individual rights are respected. But overall, it's we're following the leadership of those who have come before us. And I think that's what also allows the generations behind us to follow our lead as well. So we have a lot to look forward to.
Thank you, Preston. Well, I don't think it's a secret. We're in November. We just had an election. A lot of our focus is on what's happening on a federal level, but there's so many important things. I think you're hearing a thread of that throughout the panelists that's happening on a state level. And in January, we have a long session coming up in 2025. And this question is for Daniel. What are we hoping to accomplish in that session and over the next year or so, kind of with the lens on the state legislature?
Absolutely, yeah. The legislative session is just over 2 months away, and it feels like we're already full steam ahead trying to get ready for it. Our team really works year round to make sure that when the legislature is in session, we're able to bring as much legislation as we can to protect our rights. Some of the things that are sort of big priorities for us in this upcoming session, we're really interested in making sure we can protect the privacy of New Mexicans. That's important no matter what. It's especially important with Trump coming into the White House. And that means looking at both the way that the government and law enforcement collects information on us. It also looks at our privacy online and our health privacy. So we're looking at a suite of legislation related to privacy. I think we're also really continuing to try and build up those protections. And we're doing this in close collaboration with partners in the reproductive justice world, in the immigrants' rights world, to really think about how can the legislature continue to protect New Mexicans, protect the rights of New Mexicans, and really sort of build up some barriers to the Trump administration and other forces that would seek to do us harm from incurring on our rights. And that doesn't just look like Trump-proofing New Mexico. It also looks like making sure that people have access to the kinds of healthcare and health services that they need. One bill that we're really looking forward to is expanding access to menstrual products in state correctional institutions. And then the other huge piece of our work that isn't always as much fun is we're always working to defeat bad legislation. We're going to see attacks on our reproductive justice. We're going to see attacks on our immigrant communities. We're going to see failed tough on crime strategies. And we're always going to show up with our partners to defeat that legislation and to propose real solutions for things like crime and homelessness and behavioral health challenges, and really give the legislators an alternative when we're defeating the stupid stuff that they try and bring forward.
Thank you, Daniel. To get a little bit granular on this privacy issue, I was kind of surprised in seeing how our work coalesces a little bit. Daniel, I know you've been working hard to limit how law enforcement uses automatic license plate readers. My understanding is there's great use for that type of technology in law enforcement. If there's an Amber Alert or if a car is reported stolen and things of that nature. But right now, there's no parameters in how law enforcement uses it, how long they can store it. And I'm going to actually ask this question to Jasmine. How does something like an automatic license plate reader translate to reproductive justice and protecting people who need reproductive health care?
Yeah, so earlier I was talking about how at this point we have people in, say, Texas who might need to leave their state to come to New Mexico to get either gender affirming healthcare or abortion healthcare. If that person's in a vehicle and there are license plate readers along the way, that is information of when a person was in a certain location. And the more information that is put together, they can see the story of what someone is doing. And by being able to have that information in these places where healthcare is being criminalized, having that information can be held against someone. And so it relates to everyday life, actually, because it can relate obviously in this context of reproductive health care, but this is something where everyone is going about their lives within public, and we should not have to be within just a society where we have to be afraid that we are under constant surveillance. And so it has a very big impact on reproductive rights, but ultimately we're thinking about our collective privacy, and the right to privacy protects all of us, and it protects different facets of our life and not just reproductive rights.
Thank you. Daniel, aside from license plate readers, is there any other technology that's on our radar that, the audience should be kind of aware of that law enforcement's using that maybe we don't think about?
Something that we're looking closely and trying to learn more about how law enforcement is using it and what it might look like to protect our privacy in New Mexico are these things called reverse warrants. And I think we all know that if law enforcement want to know what's in your house, they can get a warrant. If they have probable cause and individualized suspicion, they can come in your house. But that's your house. It's the one place. What these reverse warrants are, they can send a warrant, say, to Google and ask for everyone who searched for a given term in a time frame. They can also send what we call geofence warrants, which shows them everyone who was in a certain place, whose phone or other device showed that they were in a certain place. So what we say is that that's making this haystack a lot bigger. It's not necessarily making it easier for them to find the needle in the haystack. It's exposing sometimes hundreds or thousands of people's personal information to law enforcement just because they happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time or typed the wrong thing at the wrong time. The other thing we're really concerned about is facial recognition technology, which more and more law enforcement agencies in New Mexico are using, and which poses a significant risk for our privacy, for the capability of the government to track us, but it's also not especially accurate. And it's especially inaccurate when it's trying to identify people of color, women, and younger people. And unfortunately, around the country, we've seen people detained and even charged with crimes that they didn't commit simply because of the facial recognition mismatch.
Becca, this next question is for you. I know, again, during the first Trump administration, we talked about the horrible family separation policies. There was the Muslim ban, things that feel like a distant past, but it's all coming back up for us now. And I also know that there's a lot of people probably tuning into this thinking about how they can get involved, how they can protect their neighbors. Some of that sand in the gears you were talking about. Do you have any advice for folks about what to be on the lookout for, about how to get involved?
Yeah, I think there's already opportunities to get involved, both in direct hands-on ways and with the resources we have at our disposal. And there's going to be more opportunities to come. A lot of organizations right now are building up their capacity to bring in volunteers, to bring in people who want to support. And there's going to be more of those opportunities going forward. So in the most immediate term, there's good opportunity to volunteer, to welcome people who are coming into our state seeking protection from having to flee their homes in other countries, and to support and accompany them as they complete their journey onward to their final destination, usually somewhere else within the United States. So there's organizations, faith-based organizations, community organizations that folks can go and volunteer at to welcome people, help them with travel planning, help them with these logistics, help them get settled in and oriented to their onward journey. There's other opportunities to, get involved with organizations that provide direct legal services representing people who are fighting their immigration cases. The odds are stacked very high against them. Folks can provide interpretation services, translation services, court watching, administrative services. There's a lot of volunteer opportunities. Donations are critical in this time. I think every organization we work with is pretty strapped right now. And, we are small but mighty in New Mexico when it comes to the folks who, support communities in the immigration services arena. And so I think, showing that we stand up for our values by putting our resources into those community efforts is a really important thing. And there's going to be a lot more opportunities to get involved going forward.
Thank you. Daniel, I'm going to go back to you now. You had mentioned failed tough on crime policies. Something that I think we can own at the ACLU, and the criticism we get is we point out when things are unconstitutional, when people are treated poorly by law enforcement, by our government, and we're there to try to protect those people and call out the unconstitutionality, the human rights abuses, and sometimes the solutions are lost in that. How are we thinking about solutions to kind of what people perceive outside their windows with a rise in homelessness and crime happening in our community?
Absolutely. I think we all want to live in safe communities, and every New Mexican deserves to feel safe at home and when they're out in the community. And for too many of our neighbors, including a lot of us here, that's not always the case. And so we know that New Mexico needs to do more to build up community safety. And another thing we know is that the safest communities aren't the communities that have the most police or the most people who are being sent to prison. They're the communities that have the best jobs, the best schools. They're the communities where everyone can access housing and healthcare. And so we have been working really intentionally with partners who work in a variety of different fields as advocates and as direct service providers to be prepared to talk about the solutions that we need to the legislature, things that will help get more people housed, that will help get people the healthcare that they need, that will help interrupt cycles of substance abuse. Because we know that just putting people in prison hasn't kept us safe, and it will never keep us safe. We need to do more. We need these real solutions. And we're really looking forward to being able to share with the legislators some of those plans that we're hatching.
Thank you, Daniel. Next, I'm going to ask Jasmine. New Mexico, we are situated, as you mentioned, as this kind of beacon in the Southwest where people can come get the care they need. And we have Texas right next to us. We've seen how the Texas government has targeted organizations that focus on civil rights. Are there any particular things you're thinking about with now as we see these cabinet appointments coming out that we should be kind of generally aware of here in New Mexico to continue to protect our state from attacks like that?
Absolutely. I think that's something that that's been a string that's kind of gone through a lot of these answers, and that's ensuring privacy. So privacy is going to come in a lot of different ways. For reproductive rights, it's interesting because when you think of things like medical information, you might just think about what your doctor is writing, those reports. But that can also be things such as your internet searches. And so again, Daniel was talking about the internet privacy bill, making sure that that information is safe, and also ensuring the shield laws that we already have that are protecting people are strengthened. So not only can states that are hostile to reproductive rights and are trying to get that information to criminalize people, but also requests from the federal government. Because we did see the Biden administration after the fall of Roe have an executive order to strengthen HIPAA protections for reproductive health care and when people are going to get that care somewhere else. Obviously, with changes in the cabinet, that is something where those rules can change. And the rules can change even about how people access a medication such as mifepristone. So privacy is going to be very important going forward. And I also think what Becca was talking about resources. People who come from Texas, those people may have to take days off from work, travel hundreds of miles, get transportation, and that takes money. There are abortion funds that assist people in coming. And so many, when we're thinking about protecting each other and those rights, those are things that we can help people in our community do and provide to abortion funds and assist people there. And so there are obviously very big picture things that we can do, but also on a smaller level of just assisting people in our community.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. We're going to wrap up this conversation. I hope if anything came through in this conversation is just how brilliant my colleagues are. I enjoy working with these folks every day. I learn from them every day. And I'm just so happy to work alongside these people in the fight we have coming up. 2 calls to action. One is join us at aclu-nm.org/join. So right now, I know this is virtual. You can go on your computers and join us at aclu-nm.org/join. And number 2, on Monday, we have a legislative advocacy training here in Albuquerque at 6 p.m. And you should be able to find information about that on our site. Thank you so much for joining us today for our live panel.